Hi, everyone. Hi, welcome. Hey, it's so great to see everybody. We're just letting some more people trickle in here and get settled. If you're just jumping in, you can open up the chat, click the chat button at the bottom of the window, and take a look at what everyone's saying. Folks are introducing themselves based on where they're tuning in from in the world and what your favorite morning beverage is, which is awesome. We've got some coffee in Finland. We've got some apple juice in Toronto. Coffee in Queens, New York. This is great. Brazil, South Africa, Norway, a salad eater from Chile. Awesome. Welcome, Carlos. Colorado, Illinois, France, hot chocolate in France. Yeah, that would be good, especially this time of year. Austin, Texas, oat milk latte, apple juice in Italy too. All right. All right. Well, this is so great to see everyone. And I'm going to be looking a couple different directions here and also here so that I can see the chat a little bit. Welcome to this workshop. Welcome to how to get started with synthesis and make your first patch. For those of you who I haven't met, which I'm assuming is quite a few, my name is Sarah, and I make music with modular synths, surprise, surprise, and with trumpets, and with often things that I just find lying around my house, especially things I can put microphones on and, amplify in some way. Grapefruit in Tehran, ginger beer from the Cayman Islands. Wow, we've got an incredible group of people here. Thank you all so much for taking time to join and to come together as a community to talk about what is truly one of my favorite topics in the world, which is modular synthesis. We're going to be hanging out for about 90 minutes today, and we have a lot of stuff that I want to share with all of you. So I'm going to jump right in and just dive into things. But I want to just say a couple things up front. You've found the chat. If you are introducing yourself and sharing where you are from, please feel free to pop any questions in the chat as we're going. Raina is here, who is going to help me keep track of the questions as they're coming in. And I'm going to reserve as much time as possible at the end of this workshop to just chat with all of you, answer your questions, try to help you with whatever it is you are curious about or stuck on. So I really want to encourage you to stay and stick around to the end if possible, so that we can have that Q&A. Oh, right. Okay. So let me start off with a little bit about why I'm doing this. Some of you have probably seen me sharing a little bit recently on social media about how when I was first getting started learning about synthesis and modular synthesis, I actually didn't come to it very easily and naturally. I have a classical music background. I'm a trumpet player, and I was training to be an orchestral trumpet player. And I discovered this world of modular synthesis, and I was so captivated, but I didn't know anything about where to begin. It was just like a huge mystery. I had no technical background at all. And, some people are really good at just asking questions and putting themselves out there. I was not that kind of person. So instead, I kind of struggled to figure it out on my own for years and years and years, and felt super intimidated and overwhelmed and like stressed out by the whole endeavor, to be completely frank. Finally, I got the courage up to start asking some of my friends for help. And I started to really learn how to put all the pieces together. But it was a long road, and it wasn't super easy for me to learn and navigate my way through it. And now, many years later, now that I am playing these instruments as a, like for a living as a musician, and I'm also teaching this topic a lot, I've heard over and over and over again from so many of my students that these feelings of intimidation and overwhelm are not something that I was alone in experiencing, and that it's more common than not. So I'm curious if you would just let me know in the chat, when it comes to modular synthesis and synthesis, can you let me know a little bit about where you're at in your journey? Are you brand new? If so, awesome. Are you, have been at it a little while and you're just kind of struggling a little bit with some aspect, want to take things to the next level? I'm really curious to know who's here and what you're working on. Okay, brand new, awesome. Learning VCV rack and other synths, cool, brand new. Yes, very beginner, watch some on YouTube. Brand new to this, totally brand new. This is so great. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, I want to say spent this year with a Strega, totally brand new. Okay, this is really, really exciting. And I just want to say, like, thank you so much for being here and taking this leap and jumping in, because it can be scary if you're anything like me. This first step was hard. So my goal for this workshop is to share with you what I have felt over the last couple of years were the most important fundamentals in terms of getting started in the right direction. Obviously, I can't teach you everything there is to know about synthesis in 90 minutes, but I want to give you a foundation so that you at least know where you can go next. And you at least have the confidence to know that when you're looking at a synthesizer or opening VCV rack up, you're able to, take some action and you're not just totally paralyzed. Like, what in the world is this thing in front of me? Cool. Kind of new, understand the basics. Not sure how to make the music you have in your mind. Yeah, totally. These are all really common things. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I want to start off by talking about some real basics that have to do with modular synthesis and signal flow. A lot of the time we kind of jump over this. And if you're like, well, I want to get into modular synth, so what gear should I buy first? It's often the first question. And I really want to take a step back and just talk a little bit about what modular synthesis even means and why we should care, like why it's different from other kinds of synthesis. So I have a giant sticky note here on the wall because I love scribbling on walls, and this way it's not permanent. So I'm going to grab a marker. So we know probably in some way that synthesis in itself is the practice of creating sound electronically, right? Using electrical components and electrical circuits in order to create sound. So it stands to reason that a synthesizer, when we say we are working with a synthesizer, we're working with a machine that allows us to synthesize sound, right? It's some kind of combination of circuits and electrical components that allow us to make electronic sound. In most typical keyboard-based synths, they have inside of them what's referred to as a fixed signal path. This is something that maybe you've heard of before, but basically the idea in a fixed signal path synth is that you might have some part of your synth that makes sound, some part of your synth that somehow changes that sound in a way, colors it, maybe adds some like room or vibe or nuance to it. Some part of your sound that makes, or your synth rather, that makes a different kind of sound, and some part that outputs the sound and gets it to your speakers, your headphones. Now, this is like a super reduced view. There's more than this, but you get the point. You have all these components. And in a fixed signal path synth, they are all already connected together as determined by the person who built the synth. It's like hardwired together. Sometimes you can change certain aspects of it, but the overall architecture is fixed. Does that make sense so far? The contrast, to a fixed signal path synth, as you can probably imagine, is a modular synth. And the main difference is that we still have all of these different building blocks, these different components, like something that makes a sound, something that kind of manipulates or processes a sound, something that makes another sound, something that outputs a sound. But the main difference is that these building blocks, which are called modules, are not already connected. They come independent from one another. And you and we all get to choose how to put them together in any order that we want. Is this making sense so far, hopefully? So in a fixed signal path synth, just recapping, like most standard keyboard synths are going to have a fixed signal path or a semi-fixed signal path synth. Some of you mentioned that you've been playing around with something like the Strega, which is a semi-modular. It's going to be, in part, it's going to have a fixed signal path synth. So the way that signals and sounds move through the instrument is predetermined by the developer. Modular, on the other hand, everything is its own individual Lego building block that you can connect in any way that you want. So when we take a patch cable, like one of these, or a digital patch cable in VCV rack, what we're actually doing is we are dropping it on the floor. No, what we're actually doing is we are allowing the signal to travel from one module to the other. And that's it. I think a lot about, oh, you know what? Thank you so much, Hushmand, for asking about taking notes. Reina, do you mind dropping the workbook in the chat for everyone? I was so excited to jump in. I forgot that I made a workbook for all of you. It is something that you can feel free to download and take notes, use it to keep your notes organized. It's a fillable PDF. There you go. If you click on that, you will be able to use that. You can also just write in your own notebook, of course, and the workshop is recorded. The replay will be available for a limited period of time. So if you want to be able to go back over after the fact, you can do that, because I am going to be blazing through a lot of information. Thank you so much for asking that question. And I'm sorry that I forgot about the workbook. Okay, so patch cables. We were talking about the idea of patching, and what you are doing is you're letting a signal move from one module to the next, right? I think about this in a similar way to having like an iPod or an iPhone or something, or a Walkman, if anyone remembers the Walkmans or anything like that. And you plug your cable in and you put it into your car stereo. You're allowing the signal to travel from your music making device, your iPod or whatever, to your car stereo. Very similar concept as what we're doing when we're patching between modules. So one of the things that can be so super overwhelming when you're getting started with modular synthesis is you look at all of these modules and you probably think to yourself, well, how do I know how to patch it? Like there's all these little places I can plug things in, which are called jacks. And then I've got these cables, like what do I know? How do I know what routing to go for? And the beautiful thing about modular synthesis is that in some way you can kind of do whatever you want. There's one big rule, which is that you want to patch from the output of something to the input of something. That's the one big rule. And that's going to prevent you from damaging anything. And it's also going to allow your signals to travel in a way that makes sense. So you want to travel from, let me just pause here for a moment and make sure that everybody is able to download the PDF. It seems like some folks are having, seems like okay. Seems like it's okay. Okay, everyone got it. Great. So this is the golden rule, okay? One of the golden rules. Output of something goes to input of something. The same way that you take your output. Is this showing up backwards? Or is this okay? Is it okay? Looks great. Awesome. The same way that you would take the output from your iPod and you would patch it to the input of your stereo system, right? If you go input to input, output to output, nothing's going to happen. So just keep that in mind. One of the first things that I recommend you do when you're sitting down in front of a modular synth, a semi-modular synth, VCV rack, which we'll talk about in a second, before you start to try to patch anything is to say, okay, output to input. So let me figure out where the outputs are on this module and where the inputs are. And every designer is going to mark them differently. And that's a bit of a struggle, but we just open up the manual, take a quick look, and you'll be able to see these ones are the outputs, these ones are the inputs. And that's going to set you up hugely for success. Okay, so in the world of, you might be thinking to yourself, yeah, okay, like, why would we not just want this? Like, this is easy because it's already patched. Like, why do we have to make our own connections? Doesn't that seem needlessly complicated? And in some ways it is more complex, but in my opinion, it's so much more exciting because you get to design your own instrument and your own sound world every single time you play your instrument. As long as you're going output to input, you can connect things basically in any way that you want. And you can create a lot of really, really varied and intricate patches that way. The other really big advantage about starting with modular synthesis when you're trying to learn about sound design and synthesis in general is that it really forces you to look under the hood, so to speak, and to figure out how each of these individual components works. I have a lot of students inside of learning sound and synthesis, which I'm going to share a little bit more about with all of you toward the end of this workshop, who come in having played fixed signal path synths for a long time, semi-modulars and things like that. And while they are making patches and they understand to an extent what they're doing, they really have no idea what's going on under the panel. And when they learn about the fundamental blocks of what's going on behind their synth, they're able to get so much deeper into the sound design and they're able to make so much more amazing music, which is why we're here. I think that's awesome. Okay, I've been talking a lot about gear and I've mentioned VCV Rack a couple of times. So let's just talk about that for a second. One of the big, the big questions when you're getting started is, what do I need to buy? Like, what's my instrument? And while I know it can be so tempting and fun to go out and just copy someone else's setup, like you see someone online and they're doing cool things, so you just go and buy what they have, or, go buy whatever is currently really popular on social media or something like that. I want to encourage you first to take some time to figure out what you want to actually be doing as a modular synthesizer player. And to take a little bit of time to discover for yourself what kinds of sounds you're most inspired by and what kinds of music you want to make. And if you take a little bit of time first to do that, I promise you that your creative impulses are going to lead you toward the right pieces of gear. And it'll probably save you a lot of money in the long run. And the very best way, in my opinion, to get to know what you like and to try out your workflow and to play around is to use a program called VCV Rack. So some of you may have already played around with VCV Rack a little bit. It might be brand new. So we're going to drop a link in the chat here for VCV Rack. You can go ahead and download it now, but you don't have to have it up and running on your computer during this workshop. In fact, sometimes depending on the kind of computer you're running and its age, Zoom and VCV Rack will not run at the same time. So, maybe bookmark it, come back to it later, and you can download it when we're done. and you can dive in. VCV Rack is free to download, which is one of the reasons why I really recommend it as a starting point. It is a virtual Eurorack environment. So what that means is that you have access to all of the same patching workflows, sound design possibilities, and modular synthesis kind of options that you would have if you were going out and buying hardware modules. But again, it's free. And the other thing that's amazing about it is that you have access to a bunch of really popular brands of modules like Instro and Mutable Instruments. And because their modules are primarily digital, there are actually direct replicas of them available inside of VCV Rack for you to use, and they sound fantastic. So inside of your workbook, you'll also see a couple of other virtual options that you can explore that are either free or affordable in comparison to buying hardware instruments. I'm not going to go too deep into all of them today, but by all means, after this workshop, feel free to peruse and click through. There's a lot of really cool things. The main takeaway is that I want you to know that you can get started with all of this without having to buy gear. And I think it's a really, really smart way to do it because you will be developing your musical voice, you'll be developing your creative interests, and you're going to let that lead you to the perfect instrument for yourself. And that might be VCV Rack forever, or it might be VCV Rack plus a really nice MIDI controller or something like that. Okay, so I see someone says it's cool, but I've never been able to get any sound. Yes, we are gonna solve that today. That is my promise to you, Danny. And actually, we're gonna jump into that right now. So, oh, there's one more thing. If Raina, sorry, I keep asking you to share things, but it's very helpful. If you don't mind dropping the link to the how to plan your Eurorack synth article and video. It's just one link from Perfect Circuit. Okay, so this is a resource for people who are like, even though I just shared everything about VCV Rack, are still really wanting to put together your first hardware synth. This is an article, interview, and video that I made with my friends at Perfect Circuit. It will share all of my personal suggestions and advice for building out your first system. Please hold on to it, bookmark the link, but come back here and be with us now for the next hour, and then you can check it out afterward. Okay, so when it comes to making your first patch, we've talked about what modular means, right? What synthesis means, what signal flow is all about. This is important. This might seem like a really simple thing, but I promise you, when you're stumped and looking at a synth and trying to figure out how it works, just try to remember these ideas of signal flow, output to input, output to input. Always try to remember that, and it will help. So when we're working on building a patch from scratch, there are three main things that I tend to think about. And I use these to teach people to make their very first patch. And I also use these in my practice now. I've been doing this for many, many years, and I still walk myself through these steps. The main difference at this point is that sometimes I don't do these steps in order anymore, but I still do all of them. And I think they are very, very helpful to keep you on track and to help you build out your first few patches. We're going to talk about all of them, but the first one is make sound. Step one, category one, make sound. Step two, category two, is to move sound. So make sound, move sound. And then number three is, no, back up. Hang on. Step one, sorry. Step one is to make sound. Step two is to shape sound. And step three is to move sound. Make, shape, move. Make, shape, move. Thank you, Julian. Make, shape, move. I got it. We're all here. Okay. So when we're making sound, what we're basically doing is we are taking our iPod sound source and we are plugging it into our stereo and we've got sound going, right? And that's it. We're going to open up VCV Rack here. Again, do not feel like you have to follow along in real time. It's way more important in this workshop that you are understanding the main concepts that we're talking about. It's okay if you don't catch every single little patch connection that I make, because you can always go back over that. What's more important is that the core concepts are clicking for you, and that you're understanding kind of the general workflow. Okay. So just don't panic if you're not able to exactly follow along. But we're going to start to make a little bit of sound. It's going to open up VCV Rack. And I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so when you download VCV Rack and you open it up for the first time, you're going to see a screen that looks like this. This is the default kind of demo patch. I am just going to go ahead and delete all of these extra modules by clicking on them and pushing delete, because I want to keep things simple, 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 simple to start. Here's what I'm going to start with. So let's see, does anyone have any ideas let me know in the chat, and it's okay if your answer is, I have no idea at all. That's cool. That's why we're here. But I'm curious if anyone does have a thought. What are some different ways that we can make sound in synthesis? You've maybe heard these words before. You probably know more than you think. What are some ways we can make sound? Oscillators. Yes. Oscillators. Screaming. Yeah, totally. I mean, we have lots of ways of making sound. Let's think about how synthesizers can make sound. Patch saw into input. Okay, cool. So that's a very specific example. I didn't even mean in this particular scenario. Yes, samples, cool. Noise generators, great. Oscillators, yeah, we're there. Okay, so this is perfect. Oscillators and noise generators are two of the most kind of fundamental sound generators inside of most synths. You're going to find them in pretty much every synthesizer that you work with. An oscillator is something that is going to allow you to produce different kind of steady tones of different timbres or colors. We're going to listen to one in just a second. Noise is pretty much what it sounds like. It's like white noise. If you've ever used a white noise generator to help you focus or help you sleep, that kind of thing. Okay. So in VCV Rack, in the fundamental library, which is one that is automatically downloaded when you download VCV Rack. Remember the whole thing about output to input, and how do we know what an output is? How do we know what an input is? In this library right here, all of the outputs are indicated with little black boxes around them. And that's how you know. This is one of the reasons why I recommend starting with the fundamental library and resisting the temptation to go into the main library and download like 4,000 different modules from VCV Rack. They're there and they're awesome for you in the future, but start with this. It's going to help keep you squared away when you're just getting used to things. So all these little black boxes, these are all outputs. Everything else is some kind of input. We don't need to know exactly what they all are for now. We're going to get there, but that is a starting point. Okay. So I'm just going to bring up one more module to allow us to see things a little bit, which is a scope. This is going to allow us to visualize the waveform that's being produced from our oscillator. Okay, again, output to input. So we're going to make our first patch. So we're going to click on a jack in order to generate a patch cable. I'm going to start with this one that says SIN, which means sine wave. And I'm going to run it over into the input of the scope so that we can see it. There is our beautiful sine wave. And I'm going to generate a second patch cable by command clicking I'm on a Mac, so I'm command clicking. And I'm going to put it into the input of the mixer. You can see when I do that, see how it lights up? That means that signal is flowing between the modules. Awesome. Now, this mixer is, it's kind of just like having a volume knob for your car stereo so that we're able to bring the volume down, bring the volume up. So out of best practice, before we go ahead and turn on the output, go ahead and turn the volume down. You always want to protect your ears, protect your gear, protect your speakers, but most importantly, protect your ears. Okay, so turn this down. Now, the last thing, and this is probably the reason why some of you have said, oh, I've played around VCV and I've never been able to get a sound. You've got to choose your audio output. So for many of you, it will be your built-in output, and that's going to send it to your computer speakers or your headphones. If you have an interface plugged in, you can use that. I'm going to send it through Zoom so that you all can hear it. Okay, let's turn it up and see. Give me a thumbs up or something if this is coming through. Yay. Look at that. Oops. We made sound. I know it's just a single droning tone for now, but we made sound. That is like a huge part of step one. So now what you can do from here is experiment and play with these different outputs because they're all going to have different shapes. And as a result of the different shapes, they're going to have different sound qualities or what's referred to as timbre. They're going to have different color. Let's take a listen. I'm just going to jump between them. Cool. So experiment with this, play around, and just get a feel for what you like and what you don't like. Now, there are a lot of kinds of oscillators out there, so many, but I really want you to know that all of the classic synth sounds that we know and love from the 70s and all of these famous synth lines were in some way derived from these basic building blocks. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the kind of the beauty of synthesis is about how you combine super simple things together to make very rich and complex things. And it actually doesn't take that much in order to make something sound really cool. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this module. I'm going to right click and click duplicate. It put it up on the row above, but I'm just going to click and drag to bring it down. And now I have two. So I'm going to combine them together. I'm going to take a second output here from my second module. I'm going to put it into input 2 on my mixer. So now I have two oscillators running in. Let's take a listen to that. I'm going to start to kind of change the pitch on one of them. What do you think? It's kind of cool, right? Like two waveforms. I've got a square wave and a saw wave, and already we've got this nice, rich sounding tone. Cool. So another thing we could do, we said another sound generator was noise. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab the noise module. Again, unfortunately, I don't have enough time today to walk you through what all the differences are, but they're going to have slightly different tonal characters. So my advice to you is just to experiment and play around with them and see what you like. Inside Learning Sound and Synthesis, for those of you who are curious and really want to get into it, we go deep into why all these noise colors are different and how we can use them in our sound design. You know, different noise colors are better for making hi-hats and snare drums and things like that. But for now, you can intuitively understand. And I'm going to turn this up. Now I've added in some noise. How's that sounding? Is that coming through okay? Okay, so that's make sound. I mean, there's more to it than that, but that's how you can get started with making sound. What I recommend is just play around with 2 oscillators, 3 oscillators, as many as you want. Try different combinations of waveforms. Try tuning them to different pitches. It can be really beautiful if you put them at the same frequency and then you just slightly detune one, and you're going to get all these kinds of like waves and beating patterns, which can be really beautiful. Mix in different kinds of noise, and you're going to end up with some gorgeous textural drones. Step 2 is to shape sound. Any ideas what our sound shapers might be? There's a lot. But we're just going for some ideas. Filters, LFOs. Okay. Envelope, VCA, filters, wave shapers. They are the knobs. That's true in some sense. Yeah. Cutoff filter. Cool. So in the way that I think about things, envelopes and LFOs would actually fall into the next category. But sound shapers are, again, this is just the way that I kind of conceptualize things. They are things that are going to allow us to sculpt this block of sound that we've produced, because these oscillators are just droning and they are kind of like a wall of sound. So things like filters, we can run our sound through a filter and we can remove different parts of the sound, right? Or we could run our sound into a delay or a reverb and add some vibe and resonance and room. Now, the key distinction here is that we are going to take our sound that we've created, our oscillators or whatever it is, and we are going to run it into or through our sound shaper. You can think about this a lot like if you have a guitar. I don't know if any of you play guitar or anything like that, and you have pedals, right? You take your sound source from your guitar, you run it into an effects pedal, and then you run it out to your amp. And that's what we're going to do right now. And I'm going to start with a filter because they're classic. Every synthesizer you encounter is going to probably have some kind of filter, and they make a world of difference to your sound. Okay, so this is a filter. VCF stands for voltage controlled filter. We're going to talk about what voltage controlled means in just a few minutes. VCO stands for voltage controlled oscillator. The O is for oscillator, the F is for filter. I'm going to grab myself one more volume control here too, just this kind of slider volume control, because I never like to patch directly into my outputs without some way of turning my volume down. We have to be really careful again about protecting our ears. Now, the reason why I did that is because I want to actually run all of this into my filter, right? So I'm going to put my filter after my mixer. I don't have to do that. I could take one single oscillator and run it into my input here. But then I'm only going to be shaping one of my sounds, right? Which is fine. In some cases, that would be a really nice way of doing things. But for this right now, I'm going to put it up here. And I'm going to run my combination of 2 oscillators and a noise source out of this mix output. Remember, black boxes around the jacks mean it's an output. I'm going to run it into the thing that says input here. And then I'm going to take one of these outputs. Again, my recommendation for now, when you're just getting started, is just to listen and play by ear to figure out what you like. This is a low pass output here. I'm going to turn it all the way down before I patch to my outputs, my final outputs. I'm going to go like this. Left and right. Those are my 2 headphone outputs. And I'm going to turn it up. Let's take a listen. Okay. And we hear nothing, right? Which brings us to our troubleshooting point number 2. The first one was a lot of the time people forget to select their audio output, and that's why they don't get sound. The second main thing, super common thing that I see is that people forget, especially when they get into slightly larger patches, they forget to turn up all of their volume knobs And that's exactly what's happening here. We have our final volume, like our master volume, but the level on our mixer is turned all the way down. I'm going to turn that one up. Can you hear that now? I'm going to sweep the filter. See how awesome that sounds? Like, I'm not trying to congratulate myself. It's just, it's so simple. I mean, it's so powerful. It's such a cool sound. That's like the quintessential, like dark, beautiful, epic Blade Runner synth sound. I mean, there's a few little tweaks, but I've got 2 oscillators, a noise source, and a filter, and that's it. And with this combination of things, you all are going to be able to do so much. Okay. Scary sound. Yeah, totally. And that's how it works. So after this workshop, what I really want to encourage you all to do is take this starting point, but then play with all of the extremes, try different combinations, because a sine and a square is going to result in something very different than a saw and a square. You know, they all have different colors. And what makes a thoughtful sound designer is someone who takes the time to kind of play around and try all of that. Okay. How are we doing so far? We doing all right so far? Cool. We're doing great. Now, what I'm showing you here is a pretty, what's referred to as a pretty standard subtractive synthesis workflow. And what that means in a nutshell is that we're starting with a big kind of brick of sound, and we are subtracting from it. We're carving away from it using a filter. It is by no means the only way that you can make sound. And in fact, again, if you remember, the whole reason why I love modular is because you can make sound in any way you want. So I'm just going to do a quick little scoot of some of these modules. I'm going to put my oscillator next to my filter. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my filter so that I've got 1 filter per oscillator. So this is just an example of how things can be slightly different. I'm going to run a saw wave into this filter and a saw wave into this filter. Turn my volume down before I patch. Always to be careful. And then let's take the low pass outputs of each of these filters and run them into channel 1 and 2. Okay, so now our signal flow is a little different. We've got an oscillator output to input going to this filter, and that's going into channel 1, a second oscillator going into a filter going to channel 2. What makes this interesting is that now we have independent filter control over both of our oscillators. I'll turn it up. So I can brighten one side or one voice without brightening the other. See that? So that speaks to the merit of modular workflow and why this is really, really fun, because you get to design your own kind of universe. Okay, I'm going to jump forward a little bit. We've talked about, now in the category of shape sound, we also, have delays, we have reverbs, granular tools could fall into that category. So there's a lot to explore, but the same principle in terms of how you patch it is going to apply here. You're going to run your sound into your sound shaper through your sound shaper. But now there's a big topic that I want to talk about, which is moving sound. And this is one of the biggest parts of synthesis. It is challenging to wrap your head around. So I just want to preface by saying that if it doesn't quite click right away, it's okay. For me, this took a long time to understand. I had to go over it a bunch, and that's fine. That's just the way it is. And moving sound, when I'm talking about moving sound, what I'm referring to is modulation. also known as control voltage. You've maybe heard these words, or you've seen CV, seen that short form somewhere. They basically are synonymous. They mean the same thing. So let's say we have a patch and we want to be able to sweep those filters, for example, like I was just doing. How can we do that? We can manually turn the knob like this over and over again, but then our hands are stuck sweeping filters and we don't have much else that we can do. Like we can't now go and change the pitch because we've run out of hands, start using your foot or something. So what modulation allows us to do is to automate the changing of some aspect of your patch. If any of you have ever used a DAW of any kind, like Audacity or GarageBand or Reaper or Ableton, and if you've ever opened up the automation lane and drawn an automation lane or made a fade to like fade your sound in over time, right? Or bring it up and then bring it down. That in a sense is the same idea because you're automating the fading of some parameter. It could be the loudness, it could be the amount of reverb, it could be, anything. Now, the main difference with doing it in like a DAW and doing it on a modular synth is that more often than not, there are some exceptions, but more often than not, we are using continuously fluctuating signals. So we're going to be, when we modulate something, the change is going to happen over and over and over again. Okay, let's take a look at what I mean. Oh, and before I share my screen, one big thing to keep in mind. We talked about how you have your sound and you run it through your sound shaper, right? And then to your output, right? When it comes to moving, when you're applying modulation, we are going to apply our modulation is going to be external and we're going to apply it to our primary signal chain. This is a really big thing. It might not make sense right now, but just try to keep that in mind because it trips people up a lot. When I was first getting started, I always used to think that you needed to run your oscillator through an envelope, and it never worked. And instead, what you need to do is you need to take your modulation source and apply it externally to your sound. So I'm going to show you what I mean. Okay, I'm going to open this up and I'm going to grab something called an LFO. Someone mentioned this. An LFO is essentially just another kind of oscillator. It also makes sound, but the key difference between it and one of these is the L, which stands for low frequency. The lower the frequency of something, that means the fewer times per second it's oscillating, which means it's moving at a slower pace. That's the main difference. I'm going to patch it into the scope so that we can see. Remember what the sine wave looked like on the other one? This one is moving much slower. I can speed it up. Okay. So what we're going to do with this LFO is we're going to use this shape that we can see here in the scope, this sine wave, and we're going to use it to modulate some other aspect of our patch. We're going to take the shape of this sine wave and apply it to another parameter. So what parameter should we change? Let's start with maybe the pitch of an oscillator. It might sound a little silly, but that's okay. So I've got, let's say I want to automate I want to be able to turn this frequency up and down. Like that, right? But I don't want to have to do it manually because I want to have my hands free to do other things. So what I can do is I can take the output of this LFO and I'm going to run it into this input jack right here that's labeled FM. FM stands for frequency modulation. Now, I know there are other inputs, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to walk you through every single one of them, but just know the main thing to know is that they're all different kinds of modulation inputs. So you can run signals into all of these and it'll do something cool. And you can experiment with it and listen and see what they do. Now, frequency modulation in particular is the one I'm going to start with because it's a super, super common thing that you're going to see in a lot of synths. It's an awesomely fun and cool sounding technique. So we're going to start there. So we've run it in. There it is. I'm going to turn up the level and let's see what we hear. Nothing. It's not doing anything. Not yet, right? We kind of expected something to happen, but nothing's happening. And that is because of something that is referred to as an attenuator. Okay. So an attenuator in a synthesizer is like it's like a spigot on a garden hose. Let's say you have like a hose attached to a tap, right? And you have the spigot all the way closed, like the tap is all the way closed. That's like having your attenuator turned all the way down. No matter how much water you are sending into that hose, nothing is going to come out, right? Similarly, despite the fact that we're sending this in, if our spigot, which is right here, is closed, our attenuator is closed, nothing is going to get through. So our modulation is going to have no impact, no influence. If we open the tap up a little bit, what starts to happen? We start to get a little trickle of water, right? A little drizzle coming through. Similarly, if we open our attenuator, we're going to get a little bit of influence from the modulation source. If we open the spigot all the way, we're going to have a gush of water. And similarly, if we crank open our attenuator, we are going to have maximum influence of this modulation source on this oscillator. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it up. And I'm going to open the so-called spigot, the attenuator. I'm going to also open our filter up a little bit so we can hear it a little bit better. Now I'm going to slow down the speed of this oscillator. You see, as I open it up, we get more and more. And as I close it down, we get no more influence. Is this making sense? Cool. So that is one of the biggest concepts, okay? And if you can wrap your head around this idea of modulation as something that can automatically change a parameter of sound, and this idea of an attenuator being like a spigot on a hose, you are off to the races and you are going to have so much fun exploring things. And again, even if this isn't quite clicking yet, don't fret. It takes some time. This video will be here for you and you can go back over it. And I promise you that it'll start to click, especially when you are working with the tools and trying it out on your own. Now, I'm going to do a quick little experiment here. I'm going to switch from the sine wave to the square wave. And before I do that, I want you to just imagine what impact it's going to have. And let me know in the chat. What do you think the impact is going to have? This will have on the sound. So when it was the sine wave, we were hearing, right? I'm going to change it to the square wave. You can see what the square wave looks like here on the scope. So what do you think we're going to hear? Let me see. What are we going to hear? Hard cuts, cool. On, off. Yep. More like a choppy, piercing sound. Yeah, you're getting it. High, low with no transition. Yes, you're all getting this. Okay, let's take a listen. So I'm going to turn up the attenuator so we get a little bit of influence. I'm going to speed up our LFO a little bit. And now we're making some 2-bit video game sounds, like old school Mario. Yeah, beep bop, exactly. So that's it, high, low with no transition. It's because of the shape of the waveform. Is this making sense? We take the shape of the waveform and we apply it onto the parameter. So whatever the shape is that we're using as our modulation source, we're going to hear that shape. If it's a square wave with no smooth transition between high and low, we're going to hear beep, burp, beep, burp, beep. If it's a swoopy sine wave, we'll hear woo and all of that. And Chris says you can modulate the LFO as well. You're right. And see, that's the beauty of this. Once it starts to click, it's like the floodgates open. You can modulate the modulator, folks, and I encourage you to do it. You can modulate anything. All of those jacks that don't have little black squares around them, those are inputs. So you can put things in them and modulate parameters and see what happens. And we only looked at an oscillator because we are, only have a certain amount of time together, but every module, most modules are going to have modulation inputs. You can modulate filters. You can modulate delays. You can modulate the speed of a sequencer. You can modulate envelopes. So really, once you understand these fundamental principles about how it works, it's kind of limitless. Like there's so much. Can you tell how excited I am about this? I'm so excited. Okay. Anyway, so we talked about make, shape, move, right? Those are the 3 steps. If you follow these 3 steps, you are going to be able to make a whole bunch of different patches. And you're not going to need much more than these building blocks that I showed you. Of course, you can throw in a delay or try a different filter if you want to. But what most people don't realize, and what I hear from a lot of my students is like, wow, I really thought an oscillator just kind of went and a filter kind of went, I didn't realize that depending on how you patch these things and combine them, there is a lot you can do. So my challenge for all of you and my encouragement is to really experiment with these fundamental building blocks. You're going to find whole worlds inside of them. And you're going to go back to your other synth or whatever you've looked at before. Like if you have a keyboard synth or you have a semi-modular or, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden you're going to start to get it more. I promise this happens to everyone. You're like, what? Wait, I understand why this is working this way. And now I understand how to tweak this sound in the way that I've always wanted to. It starts with the fundamental Lego building blocks. We all like Lego. Lego's fun. Okay. So, those are the 3 main steps. Now, I talked a little bit about where to go from here. What I recommend that you do is just to play, make a patch, keep it simple, make a patch, and then make something else. Try a different set of tools, different outputs, different inputs. You're going to learn a lot by putting all of this into action. The other thing that I'm really excited to share with all of you is about a little bit more about learning sound and synthesis. Some of you are already familiar with this program. I think some of the folks here are in fact in learning sound synthesis. It's awesome to see you here. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I just want to take a brief second to share this with you and to invite you to hop onto the wait list if it sounds like something that you are interested in joining. So I'm just going to quickly walk you through this. This Learning Sound Synthesis is a program, a coaching community that is made up of people from all over the world who are passionate about modular synthesis and sound design. And it is my absolute passion to teach inside of this program. The inside of Learning Sound Synthesis, when you enroll, you get access to a handful of different things. So I just want to make sure that you kind of know what is in there for you. The main thing when you enter into it is you get access to a huge curriculum of 8 modules that walk you through everything that you need to know in order to make sound and make music with modular synths. Everything from what we covered here today, but in a lot more depth, all the way through to advanced patching strategies, the same ones that I use in my practice daily, how to compose with these instruments, how to perform live with them. And I hope some of you will join us tomorrow on the next workshop about performing live. We also dive deep into the history and all these different amazing aspects of working with synthesizers. This little quote here on the screen, I wanted to share because, again, the reason why I'm doing this and the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because when I got started, I really felt like I did not have the technical enough brain to get through this. I really didn't. I didn't think I had what it took. And I held myself back for a long time. And this is one of my students from the very first group of learning sound synthesis. Her name's Laura. And she came in similarly in a similar state to me. She was passionate about modular synths, wanted to play them, wanted to learn about them, but was convinced she was too like not smart enough. And now she composes music on them. She performs live. She makes these beautiful audiovisual pieces. And she went from getting started making her first sounds in VCV Rack, just like you, to putting together her incredible hybrid semi-modular and Euro rack system. It's really inspiring. And this is another one of my students from the first cohort, Jared, who goes by Ice Locust. Some of you may have seen him on Instagram. He had been playing semi-modular synths for a little while and was kind of curious to take his practice to the next level. And 4 months after joining the community, he started making his first album, which is now available. It's out on Bandcamp, and it's beautiful. And he's performing live left, right, and center. So it's really inspiring to see. Something else that I want to mention that's really important to me, and we've all taken, online courses and things like that, where you get dropped into a big curriculum and you're left to fend for yourself. And I just want to say that that is not how learning sound and synthesis works. It is not a passive, just pre-recorded training program. We jump on Zoom, just like we're doing right now, multiple times throughout the course of a few months to meet up as a community. And Raina, by the way, is the community manager inside of Learning Sound Synthesis. So she is around for all of this. We hang out. You can get feedback on your music. You can ask your questions. We can work through things together. And we really, really support one another as a community. So it's an amazing place to just grow in general as an artist. There's also an incredible forum space for, asking questions about what gear you should you're thinking about getting, if anyone's tried this, what interface is best, blah, 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 all of those kinds of things, form study groups, all of that. And lasting friendships, not to sound corny, but it's actually true. And the last thing that I want to mention is that when you enroll, there are also a whole bunch of really exciting bonuses. I'm not going to share them all today because I have to leave some things a surprise. But one of the most popular ones is this How to Plan Your First Hardware Modular Synth 2-day live event, where you are able to receive a personal consultation on specifically how to navigate that whole process. What power supplies and cases and modules and cables and all of that stuff is best for you, how to understand all the lingo and the technical nitty gritty. And we dive deep into it. And we do it after you have learned the foundations and you really know what kind of music you want to make, so that you are letting your creative goals fuel your gear decisions. So if this sounds interesting and something that you are curious to learn more about, the doors are going to open in a couple days. So what I'd like to invite you to do is hop onto the waitlist at soundandsynthesis.com. Some of you might already be on the waitlist, and if so, that's great. You are going to be the first notified when everything opens up. And that's going to give you the opportunity to secure your spot, because this program only opens up 2 times a year and enrollment is limited. So folks who are on the waitlist get first dibs to jump in, get started, and secure their spot. And with that, I'm going to come out and I want to spend the next 20 minutes or so answering your questions and chatting with all of you about everything we've just covered. We jumped into a lot today, so I'm sure there are a handful of questions, and I want to make sure that I get through as many as possible. Oh, I'm getting sent a text document from Raina with questions. This is awesome. Okay. Let me download this. Thank you, Raina, for being so organized. Okay, this is super cool. So let me take a look through at these questions. Chris asks, do we always have to start with an oscillator? Oh, that's such a great question. No. So when you're getting started, the idea of make sound as a starting point is generally good. You want to make sound somehow to start off. But remember, there are noise sources And those can be a beautiful way to start. You don't need an oscillator. Running a noise source through a filter can make it sound like ocean waves or like wind crashing through the trees. I think I merged oceans and wind together, but you know what I mean. Similarly, when you get into slightly more advanced patching, you're going to learn that you don't actually need an oscillator to make sound at all. There's a really cool technique called filter pinging, which is one of my favorite ways of making drippy, plonky sounds. And it involves sending any kind of hard-edged signal into a filter with resonance turned up. And it basically pings the filter. It makes it go ping like that. And it's beautiful. You can make sound in a million different ways. So yeah, what I recommend is just experimenting. You don't always need to start with an oscillator. Vlad is asking, I have a lot of semi-modular synths, which I combine in different ways. And I ask myself why I should go to modular. Is it more interesting or comfortable? I can't make a decision. You know what? My answer to you is this really depends on your creative goals. There are a lot of semi-modular synths out there that are awesome. I have some. I mean, you were all serenaded to the music of the Strega when you came in. If you came in right at the top of the hour, that's a semi-modular synth. I love it. So yeah, nothing against semi-modular synths at all or anything like that. I think to answer that question, if you're curious, I would recommend playing around with VCV Rack and just seeing if the modular workflow is something that excites you creatively. It is definitely different. I mean, with a fully modular, you have the ability to create entirely arbitrary signal flows, which means that if you're excited by things like feedback and generative patching and things like that, you may find that you have more flexibility when you're working in a modular environment. But there's a lot to, there's a lot to explore. I've always wanted to know the reason for different colors of patch cables. This depends on the person. I think generally speaking, different color patch cables are kind of fun and cool looking. I know some folks who have color-coded systems, so they will use one color to indicate that something is a primary audio in their main audio path, and they'll use a different color to visually show that something is a modulation signal. The truth is, though, that everything inside of your synth is all a signal. There's no real difference between an audio signal and a other signal. It's just whether or not it's moving fast enough that we can actually hear it at audio rate. So I don't do that. I just have multiple colored patch cables because they look cute and I find it pleasing. So, but each to their own. Okay, let's see. Quick question with the square wave on the scope. Why do the corners, this is a really good question, Chris. This is something that I talk a lot about. There's a long answer for this that I go deep into in learning sound and synthesis. It has to do with, so in VCV Rack, when you're seeing the glitches, it's because they're kind of emulating an analog type oscillator. And the simple answer is that the components that are used to create these waveforms do not create absolutely perfect, absolutely symmetrical, pure waveforms. Depending on the specific little components that are used and the way that the circuit is built, everything is going to be slightly different. And that's why a lot of these different oscillators sound different. When you hear someone say oh, this oscillator sounds so different than this oscillator, it's actually, to an extent, it's true, because what the components are used and how the circuit is built will create these subtle differences in how accurate the waveform is. Now, with digital digital synths and things like that, we can be super accurate. So inside of VCV Rack, there's a little toggle, and you can switch between digital mode and analog mode to go from like a perfect waveform to an analog kind of simulation, or a slightly less than perfect. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so Laura is asking the advantage of adding a VCA at the end for master volume instead of just, yeah, this is just something that I like to do as a way of making sure that I have full control over the output sound. It's particularly useful, I suppose, not so much in the example that we were looking at, but if you started to add things like delays on the end of your signal chain, that way, you know, even if you turned down the mixer, if you had already sent something into your delay, it would continue to echo. The sound wouldn't stop. So having that final VCA at the end is a way, it's kind of like just like a kill switch and a final way to just attenuate the overall levels on that. So that's what I like. I'm seeing in the chat that Omri Cohen is awesome, and I just want to chime in and agree and also say that Omri is one of the many guest speakers and guest artists inside of Learning Sound and Synthesis. So there is a really cool group of folks in there who do little guest spots talking about different things. Todd Barton is one of them. Omri Cohen. There's a bunch of folks. I'm not going to ruin all the surprises. I just want to kind of hype up Omri because I also think Omri is amazing. Okay, let me see. What changes between patching it on the FM or the volt per octave? Okay, so Andrea asks, what changes between patching it on the FM or on the volt per octave? Volt per octave. Yeah, the volt. So the volt per octave input is a special modulation input jack that is scaled to receive. It is scaled to accept 1 volt per octave tuning, which means that if you it's particularly useful if you are using like a keyboard or something like that, and you want it to be able to play in tune semitones. You would be able to send in 1/12 of a volt, and that would adjust the tuning by 1 semitone. Is that right? 12 notes in an octave. I think that's math. So that's the difference between the volt per octave. The other big difference is that you'll notice there's no spigot or attenuator on the volt per octave input. So what's going to happen if you just patch like a free running LFO in there? It's going to just be like, it'll be like the floodgates are open. You don't have the ability to control how much influence it has over the sound. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, sync Ableton to VCV Rack. It would be a brand new world. Totally. Yep. The class meets, I'm just seeing some other questions here. I'm doing my very best, by the way, to get all of these questions. I just want to say that if I miss you, if I don't answer your question, it's not an intentional thing. You can always feel free to send me an email. You can email support@sarahbellereid.com. You can also send me a message on Instagram if you want to ask me your questions if I happen to not be able to get to all of them, okay? So the Learning Sound and Synthesis program, how often do the classes meet? Okay, so the core curriculum that I showed you, those 8 modules, those are all structured as go at your own pace. So in those core modules, you have access to a ton of video training. There are step-by-step demos, there are exercises, there are workbooks, there are listening guides, there are audio downloads. It's a whole slew of things. You can do those at your own pace on your own schedule. And once you enroll in learning sound and synthesis, you have that for life. So that is your resource now, in a year, and in 10 years to come back to. And what's really, in my opinion, beautiful about the community is that folks stick around. There are people who show up in the coaching calls and in the community who have been there from day one, which means you're getting the perspectives from not just myself and your classmates, but from people who have been, have successfully gone from their very first patch into an awesome performance practice, composition practice as a synthesist. There's also people in there who started the program already with decades of experience under their belt and really just wanted different perspectives and wanted to deepen what they're doing. So it's a rich environment, and you can stay in there for as long as you want. Now, in terms of the live meetings, we tend to meet once every 2 to 3 weeks each cycle. And then we do that every cycle. And you're welcome to come back. That's the other thing, is there are graduates who come back and join in the group calls each cycle. Yeah, it's just a big, happy, nerdy synthesis family. They are scheduled to be European friendly. I do my very best. As I'm on in the US, so I do my best to schedule things at a time that's going to be as time zone friendly as possible. I schedule some in the evening here as well, which is not as European friendly, but is more friendly for folks who live in further time zones from me, to be able to get you in your morning time. And just like this, all of those group meetings are recorded. So replays are posted like 24 hours after. You can watch through the replays. You can submit topics and questions. You can still participate even if you don't come live. I hope that answers that question. Okay. Let's see. I think we are coming to wrapping up here. Oh, thank you so much. I'm seeing some nice, thank you. I appreciate it. I really hope that this has been helpful for all of you. What I would like to suggest is for you all to go forth, make some patches, make some sounds, and please tag me on social media. I would love to see what you have made. You can tag me at Belle Reid, send me an email. I would love to offer you any thoughts or support, and just to celebrate what you're working on. Okay, just scanning through here to see if there is any more questions. Thank you. People are saying thank you for joining. Yes, I am a true oscillator. I hope that was for me. I love that comment. Thank you. Okay, I think I've gotten everyone. I see one more question. It says how I learned synthesis. Very slowly. Through a lot of trial and error, through a lot of just trying things out. And I did have some very generous friends who walked me through some different aspects of it. It took me a long time. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about teaching this topic, is because for one, it's just awesome. And for two, I see a lot of people who are like me, who want to get started, but don't know where to start, or are intimidated or kind of overwhelmed by all of it. And I really want, the biggest takeaway from this workshop for me is that you all leave realizing that you're more than capable of doing this if it's something you want to do. It's not too technical. It's not above you or beyond you. It might take a little bit of time, but you are more than capable. And why I do this and why I have learning sound and synthesis is to help support and shorten that gap and make it as easy and as inspiring for everyone as possible. So that is why I am doing this. For those of you who want to join tomorrow's workshop, which is about live performance with synths, it is at 9 a.m. Pacific time, which is 4 p.m. UTC, Universal Coordinated Time. And I believe that is 3 hours earlier than when we started today. I just saw that in the chat. All right. Don't forget to send me a message if you have any other questions that I didn't get to. Thank you all so much for joining. I can't wait to see all of your patches and hear all of your sounds. And I will see you all out there in the world. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Take care.